Hello everyone, and welcome back. As usual, I'm DJ Zelks, aka Digital Magic, here from Team Lone Wolf, with yet another immersive railroading tutorial video. So today we finally cover the one thing that I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. We finally cover steam locomotives. So steam locomotives are a bit interesting. Mostly because we finally get to work with the steam hammer, which is the thing animating way in the back, and we finally start to talk about a couple of other things that come in play. As you notice, I've also now have a creative fluid tank and a creative bin full of charcoal. Actually, I think, yeah, is it charcoal? Hold on. Well, it's not whatever it was a second ago. My bad. Let me just grab a new one of those. There we go. Okay. So, you can see, it's cold. So I'm just going to put that in there for a second. So, I went ahead and put some more of the steel that I had in here. So, we're now fully topped off. And going back, we are going to be building today the DNRGW K36. It is, well, as you can see, the info there. It's a narrow gauge, as you probably can anticipate. So let's go ahead and figure out what we got. So you'll notice that as a steam locomotive, it's got a whole lot more to it than, say, the diesels. And that's true if you look at any of these others. There's just a ton more parts that we have to deal with. So first of all, as usual, we have to get the frame. So let me go ahead and single cast the frame. And I apologize if the audio is a bit different than you're used to. I'm playing on a different mod pack today, so the audio levels might be a bit off than what you're used to. So, went ahead and put down the frame. See, it's a tad bit bigger than the box cabs over there. So let's see what we need to do first, shall we? So first we need the steam chest. Now, I'm going to be using a lot of both technical terms and layman's terms today. So just keep that in mind. The steam chest is also, a lot of people will know it as the actual pistons themselves, technically. Or rather, the housing for the pistons. The actual technical term for them is actually technically the steam chest. Since we don't model the pistons individually, it's not actually the steam chest. The steam chest is actually what's right on top of the piston, this area right here, and also the area that's kind of around here. It normally doesn't include the piston, but we just classify it as being also a part of the piston, so just keep that in mind. And again, you can kind of tune out some of this stuff as I'm talking about, because some of you might be interested in it, some of you might not, some of you might think I'm completely and totally wrong. That's okay. I'm just telling you what I remember. So I need both the front and rear bogies, one of each bogie wheel, and then 4 of the actual driver wheels. So let's go ahead and grab the driver wheels. Fantastic. And there we go. Next up is the bogie parts. I'm going to go ahead and use a large wrench since they're somewhere in my inventory right now. There we go. And now you can see we've got a ton of new parts here that we didn't last time. So piston rod, main rod, union link, side rod, valve stem, all this fun stuff. And sadly, a lot of that is just being tedious. So I'm going to try and talk about each part as much as I can, but just keep in mind that a lot of it is just kind of going back and forth and me working on stuff kind of sidelines. So the side rods are first, and there's no real method to how you make them, or order that you have to make them, so just keep that in mind. I just am doing it this way. So side rods and the main rods first. Now, as you notice, if I hover over both of these, you'll notice that there is red text here, which says requires processing in the steam hammer before use. And if we go back in here, you'll notice that it also says steam hammer, like I mentioned in the previous videos, on which tools you'll need. So for this one, we finally get to work with this. You'll see that you've got this kind of interesting GUI. You've got a slot to put in and a slot to take out, and then a lot of this black space. And you'll see what that black space is in just a second. I apologize for the loud sound. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. But now you'll notice that it no longer has that flavor text off to the side. And I truly do apologize. There's not really any easy way of making it any quieter. You'll notice also that the items do not stack in the steam hammer, so just keep that in mind. They do not stack. You need to pull out before you can put in. Lovely. So again, just right click and you get the parts put in. Oh, nice and lovely. Now again, you'll notice that some of these parts are just kind of floating in midair. Don't worry about that. It's just because I haven't put the parts on, they're not there. Code-wise they are, model-wise they are, it's just they're not visible. So just keep that in mind. Just because they're floating doesn't mean you have to do anything really wonky with it. So don't worry about that. So next up is the two piston rods. And then let's go ahead and go... Actually, let me go with the centric crank first. So it's a bit easier to tell what parts are. Piston rods. And again, you notice that even though I tried to put in two, it only put in one. I'm actually going to see if I can turn that down any. See if that helps. Yeah, it helps some. Still ungodly loud, but better than nothing at least. There we go. So now you notice that the centric crank is on. You'll notice that also, at this point, almost really all the rods that you would need for a Stephenson gear, Stephenson valve gear locomotive is all in place. So next we get into the actual valve gear stuff. You don't thankfully need to tune any of that. That's all done behind the scenes. So don't worry about needing to get stuff in the correct orientation. If you haven't played with this mod before, that's all handled automatically. We may be implementing that at some future point in time in like a harder, during the maintenance update, but as of the moment, you don't have to worry about that. So you can see that I've got the centric cranks here. For those of you that don't quite know their valve gear terminology. So there's that. Let's go ahead and go with the raised bar. Actually, I'll go with the centric rod first. Again, you don't need to put this in any specific order. It's just this is how I'm making them. And again, you'll notice all these need the same processing, sadly. All the raws need processing, and it's kind of one of the downsides of doing Steam. Quickly turn today. You'll notice that again, I'm now getting some new messages when I hit the two buttons. Again, that's just because I'm on a different mod pack. I've got other stuff in here. Again, you'll notice that there's a bit of a visual glitch where it's not quite lined up. Again, you don't need to worry about it. Everything's fine. That's just a weird issue both in the code and also in the model itself. So don't worry about that. That's normal. So I've got those. Now I just need the union link, combination, stem, and radius. Cool. There we go. And those are the last parts. Lovely. And now we don't have to listen to that awful audio repeatedly. There we go. So now we have some more stuff. So the smoke box, the firebox, and then the boiler segment. So that will be fun. I need to go grab some of these blocks of steel so we can actually do this. So we're going to need 5 large plates. It's over here. Oops, there we go. There we go. Put these on. And there we go. So, firebox and smoke box. Alright, and then the boiler segment. Now, this is where we finally get into something kind of interesting. So, if we click on plate type again, you'll see it says boilerplate and plate boiler as a new button has appeared. Now again, click on this and you see all the locomotive types, and you have to make sure you click on the right locomotive and the right part, make sure the gauge is right, and then get another block of steel. Now you will get a item that says, oops. There we go. You'll see an item that says boilerplate DNRGW K36 gauge narrow, or whatever type of locomotive you're working with. Now you'll notice that if I try and right click on this again, it doesn't say, it won't let me add it, but you will see boiler roller. So we finally get to work on the last tool type, which is this right here, which is the really one of the 3 types that actually have a semi-obvious animation. and that's when it's done. It's the only one that you can kind of that has a more easily visible way of telling when the part is done, similar to the track roller. This one you can kind of tell. It's more of just the speed on it's going if you don't have audio. Audio is the best way to tell, honestly, in my opinion. So then right click with that, and now we've got something that looks kind of like a steam locomotive. But if we right click, you'll see we've got more parts that we have to do. I believe that it's actually taken up some of my medium. Oh no, it has not. Lovely. So if I right click on it, you'll see I need 2 small plates and 7 large plates. Now you'll notice I only have 2 blocks of steel left, which means that we get to use a mechanic that I don't know if I ever really talked about beforehand. But let me first get this plate. So now we got small plates. Go ahead and right click. And again, you'll notice that I need the large plates. So if we go over here, go back into here, we can now use the block of steel object that I think I mentioned a while ago. So just right click on it, or left click on it, sorry, and we can now, if we just press this, get just a block of steel out of it. Now you will notice that it is slightly different, slightly off color from the block of steel that I have otherwise in my inventory. This is the immersive engineering block, and you'll notice that the block that it is actually made is the thermal foundation block of steel. Do not worry, Forge is able to identify between the two of them and realize that they're both blocks of steel. So it might look different and it might be from a different mod, but it's all recognized by immersive railroading as a block of steel. And that's really what you just need to have it do. Except for the fact that I completely and totally botched that up, and now we have lost an entire block of steel. So that's the one thing you need to be worried or careful of when using the plate roller, is that you need to make sure that you don't accidentally change the plate type while it's making it, or else you'll just lose the block entirely. So just be aware of that as a quick note. That's 3. Fourth one to just put in. Here's the 5th one. So it's currently doing the 6th, and this should be the 7th block. It does get tedious after a bit. Nothing that you can do about it. You can automate the machines technically, and I'll be kind of covering that in a later episode on automation and some of the more well, automation really. I will be talking about that. There are ways to automate these machines, but it's not immediately obvious sometimes. So put it all together, and now this is complete. It looks all very nice. Now then, if we go into this, you'll notice that we have 3 levels, or level bars, if you will, and then the brake and the throttle and the speed. Now, starting from the very far left, you've got your water, how much water you've got it, your pressure that you have in the boiler, and then the temperature of the boiler. Now, I do have this in Celsius, and you can swap it over to Fahrenheit. I just have it in Celsius, so just keep that in mind. Just like with the diesel, the temperature is ambient, or is set from the ambient temperature when you first place it down. So do be aware of that. It will change depending on where you are. And when we right click in it, you'll see a our GUI is slightly different. So we have how much of the water we have, which is very similar to how much fuel we have in the diesel. And then we also have these slots down here, which is where you put your burnables. So if I really quickly pop out of here, oops, run over here, and then just start grabbing some water. And I'm going to shift right click into this, which I believe I talked about in the previous episode. But in case I didn't, you can shift right click into actually I think all rolling stock, and it will just open up the inventory without you having to get inside of it. So, oops, very useful. Good lord. There we go. Okay, so now we just need to grab something burnable. So I'm using coal in this case, but you can use anything that you would be able to burn in a furnace. So coal, charcoal, coal blocks, charcoal blocks, wood, sticks. If it's able to be burnt in a furnace, you can burn it in a steam locomotive, as a general rule of thumb. Now, if I put these in here, you'll notice that this now has a fire animation and has a red level. And the red level isn't quite obvious. Well, now it is. You can see that there's a tiny bit of kind of gray space up at the top. That is how long the fuel has, or to continue burning. So that's useful for keeping an eye on how long something can kind of fire up, can sustain. And now, if we're in here, you'll notice that the temperature is slowly increasing. And I can put the throttle up either way, it won't change the temperature. You will want to, however, while you're doing this, have the throttle at zeroed. So just keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that the amount of slots that you have something burning in them, or having the fire animation at the red area, changes how fast it fires up. So say if I have only 2 out of all of these slots actually filled, this will be heating up a lot slower. More stuff burning, hotter temperature, faster steam. Simple as that. Now, while this is still firing up, I'm going to hop over here, and we're going to make another type of rolling stock. Now, if I go back into here, you will notice that there are these tenders over here. Now, I'm going to grab the correct tender, which is the one that I always can ever find. Here it is, the K36 tender. And you notice that there's not many parts to it, as you can probably imagine. So you've got the frame, the 2 bogies, and then the 4 bogie wheels. Go ahead. There we go. Now it's hooked up. Put down 2 bogies, wheels, and then we need 3 large plates. Now I'm doing this while this steams up, mostly because steaming up can take a while depending on the locomotive. And I will be talking about a way of kind of speeding it up in just a few moments once we actually have this fully running. Now you'll notice that there was a chuff sound that just played. That will play whenever a steam locomotive is actually ready to start moving. It's when it's at 100 Celsius, or I don't remember how high it has to be for Fahrenheit, but it is ready to go now. So if I go ahead and finish this up, we now have our lovely tender. And if I get into here, you'll notice that there we have steam building. Now at this moment, if I try and put the throttle down, you'll notice that we're not moving anywhere. Well, just like in real life, steam locomotives can only move at after a certain pressure. After all, you can't just blow on a steam locomotive and hope that it moves. It doesn't really work like that. They're too heavy. So you need to wait for your pressure to build up, which is why we always recommend you have the throttle zeroed or very close to zero so that the steam doesn't get pressed out. Like as I have fully here, it's trying to expend that steam, and it happens to be that I'm able to make steam at the exact same rate I'm expending it right now, but I'm not going anywhere because there's not enough steam to actually make the steam locomotive go. So just keep that in mind. You do need to build pressure before you go anywhere. And my rule of thumb is about a quarter is roughly about when a steam locomotive can start to move, but about a third is when you're going to want to be able to actually start moving it. Before that, you're not really going to be able to get anywhere. So just keep that in mind. And you notice that also, I've stopped making steam. That's because these are all empty. And you'll also notice the steam's starting to disappear. That's just because I'm not producing any, and it is slowly reducing the amount of steam I have. Just like an actual steam locomotive would. So you're always going to want to have some coal in the firebox to actually make some steam, assuming you want to be making steam. Now, while this is actually steaming up, let's talk about a unique mechanic to the steam locomotives, which is the tender mechanic. Now, a tender is usually used to store, let me get in here, water and coal for the locomotive. So, if I grab some water, and then I grab some coal, I grab a fair bit of coal actually, and I right click into here, and I start putting coal in, you'll notice that they're automatically disappearing. Well, where in the world is the coal going? Well, they're actually going all into the locomotive. Something that's unique about the tenders for steam locomotives, if they're hooked up to a steam locomotive, and it doesn't matter if they're the correct tender or not, it's just a tender, it will automatically refill the fuel in it. So, as you can see, a lot of that is from the coal I try to put in the tender. Now, something that is worth note that I do use sometimes is that you'll notice that this is all the slots are coal. Now, if I pop out of here and I go grab some, say, oak wood, which is a burnable, it does burn it into the locomotive, and I'll show that in just a second once I fix that. But I put it in the tender. You'll notice that it's not really, and I don't know why it's disappeared. It should be here, and it might just be an issue on my end. But if I pull out the coal, there's no wood going in there. I'm not entirely sure where that wood has disappeared off to, but it normally would stay here in the tender, which can be used to number these locomotives temporarily. So what I normally do is I name a stick a number, and I put it in the first slot of the tender, and I just never use sticks for the locomotive, because it won't pull, it will only refill the coal, or the fuel type, with fuel of that same type. So it will refill the coal with coal, but it won't refill the coal with wood. And it won't try and put in another type of burnable, it'll only refill. So it's a kind of nice mechanic that you can use to number your locomotives, at least at the moment. Now, what about water? You'll notice that I am starting to kind of expend... I'm starting to expend water. Well, just like with coal, if I put in some water, and I'm not sure what in the world happened there. Oh, there it is. Somehow glitched up and tried to put it in the water slot, apparently. You'll notice that I put it in here, and it's not at 2 buckets. It's at a bucket and almost a bucket. That's because, just like with the coal, I don't know what keeps happening. It refills the water, which is very useful for your longer journeys, so you don't have to keep tons upon tons of buckets in your inventory. You can just load up the tender with water. And this will automatically fill up the water, even if there isn't any water in the locomotive. It'll just automatically shunt the water. So if there is water in the tender, it will try and shunt it into the locomotive no matter what, which is kind of useful. So let me just go ahead and grab some more water, put in the coal, and again you'll notice that the coal has disappeared, just like as I mentioned. I appear to have lost a bucket. Interesting. That does happen sometimes. It's just an issue with. It's possible. Yeah, there it is. They will sometimes go into the wrong slot and also just disappear sometimes. You just need to kind of click around, and eventually it will appear. Unless you're on a multiplayer server, in which case it will just completely and totally disappear on a very rare chance. This is mostly a bug of how information is stored in the item slots. So just keep that in mind. That will happen on a very, very rare chance. There's no way of really controlling it on our end. We're doing our best to try and fix it, but just keep that in mind. Now also, as a quick note, just like with the diesel, you can pull out the water by putting it in the same slot again. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of leave that there for the moment, and go ahead and put in the rest of this coal, assuming I can grab it. Also grab some more coal and change the day. And I think we've actually fully filled our locomotive. Yep. Now, in just a second, you'll see that I'm about to reach full pressure. And a great way of telling when you've reached full pressure, if you're not in the locomotive, is the pop valve going on, which we'll hear in just a second. Assuming this pressure wants to build faster. There we go. So the pop valve will go off when you're at full pressure, which, for those of you that don't really know steam locomotives, it's a way of making sure that the locomotive doesn't explode from all the pressure. It's a way of venting off the pressure. Now it'll just go off when it reaches the maximum pressure possible. It will play that sound and it will create a particle effect. So let's go ahead and back up. And again, the controls are almost identical to the, well, they are identical to the diesel locomotive in that reverse is reverse, brake is brake. Now, and I think I mentioned this earlier, there is the, I'm not sure which button it is for me right now, because I think that, sweet, googly moogly, I'm very sorry about that. That's what I get for not remembering what keybinds I have for my recording software. I don't remember which keybind I have for on this configuration, but there is a keybind called Dead Man Switch. And I think I might have mentioned it for diesel. It's when you leave a locomotive, it'll cut throttle and put on full brakes if there's nobody in the locomotive to control it. And that is, of course, a switch that you can turn on and off. It's just a toggle button, if you will. That doesn't work for the steam locomotives. Even though a lot of older steam locomotives don't have that sort of functionality of like a brake band's lever or something like that, all the locomotives in this mod have a brake man switch. So just keep that in mind. It does apply to the steam locomotives as well. Now, we go ahead and whistle. Ooh, hello. I apparently need to completely and totally change my control settings. Oh yeah. Apparently equals for me. I'm not sure why. But let me go ahead and fix that. Yeah, of course everything's taken. What a surprise. Now, for those of you that know the whistle, or know about whistles, you'll know that a steam whistle is not normally at the same pitch during the entire time that a whistle is being pulled. Well, and that is called quilling. Now, we do have cooling in the mod. And that is purely based on the way where your cursor is pointed in the vertical. So, very far top is no whistle, full bottom is full whistle. So let's go ahead and go on a bit of a journey, shall we? Now you notice that I do have steam kind of popping out on either side of the locomotive. That is called the cylinder cocks. We don't really have any way of controlling that at the moment. That's just for show. However, we will be using that when the maintenance update comes around. And I've completely and totally left all of my cars. Good job, me. I need to find my handy dandy coupling hook because I apparently never recoupled this. There we go. Now it's coupling correctly. Let's go ahead and be on our way. Now, if you look down at the bottom at my steam gauge, you'll notice that it's no longer at full if I've got any sort of throttle. That's just because I am slowly depleting the steam. And it is possible to deplete the steam faster than you can build it back up with some locomotives, so just keep that in mind. That's assuming you've got the throttle at full. Might as well give it a little whistle show, if you will. Not really much of a whistle show, but I don't have the ability to smoothly look right now. Now, as we come back, I will be talking about a mechanic that you will want to keep in mind. Which is that you can, in fact, explode the locomotives. And I don't like really talking about it, but you can, in fact, make these locomotives explode. Which is something you want to keep an eye on. Which is, if your water level falls below, theoretically it's 75%, it's actually about 50 or so, but either way, if it falls below a certain point, the temperature gauge will start increasing beyond 100 Celsius. At that point, it will change to a darker color, which point you want to be starting to put in water in as fast as you can. Because if it reaches the max temperature, you will explode. Well, the train will explode, that is. So just keep that in mind. That can happen. And that's partially, and you will want to really throw all the water you have into it, because the hotter it gets, the faster it depletes the water. Which is pretty common, actually, in real life. If you've got a pan full of water and you turn the temperature up, the temperature at a lower amount, or at a lower temperature, the water will boil off slower than it will if it's at a hotter temperature. Just general rule of thumb. Excuse me. Now, I'm going to get that off so I can actually hear myself for a few moments. Now, you will notice that it took a long time for the steam locomotive to build pressure. This is kind of a tips and trick part. There is a way of doing it quicker. However, it's not exactly what I would classify as being recommended. This is called flash heating. And again, this is not something that I condone. I just want to clarify for the record, this is not something you should be doing. I'm showing you this solely for the purpose of education. I swear to God. But if I put in a singular bucket of water, let me actually grab 2 buckets. I'm going to be using the mechanic that I just previously talked about. There we go. So if I start increasing the temperature, you'll notice that at a lower amount of water, it increases very rapidly, way faster than it had previously. And I'm actually going to go ahead and kind of put the throttle in reverse, so as soon as we get pressure, we're going to shoot backwards into the tender. And you'll see why in a second. As we get hotter and hotter, it will start to build the pressure a lot quicker. As you can see, it just shot it straight up. And that's what happens when you try and do that. You notice it shot actually a pretty impressive range out. So just keep that in mind. If you do flash heat, you do have the possibility of accidentally, well, destroying literally everything when you flash heat. So as a rule of thumb, don't flash heat unless you've got a lot of buckets of water handy and or a tender full of water, which for some reason it wasn't transferring correctly. However, I bet you that the tender actually didn't have that much water actually in it at the time of me coupling up, and it wasn't able to fill quickly enough. So just keep that in mind. I wouldn't recommend you doing that unless you're in, say, creative or something of that nature, because it can be really bad. It can go horribly very quickly, as you saw here. But now that that's kind of talked about, the steam locomotives are useful as a kind of talking about the locomotives in general. The steam locomotives are a bit more useful than the diesels. The reason being is that a lot of them have a higher traction amount, or a higher traction than the diesels do. That being said, they do take a while to heat up. They are a bit harder to use, as you can probably imagine. So with that in mind, that has been the tutorial on steam locomotives, I guess is the best way of putting it. Really, yeah. I'm kind of sad that I had to leave off here. I didn't mean for that to explode. I was planning on trying to do that like over there somewhere. Just kind of show you how massive the explosions can be. Because they are pretty bad, actually. But it seems I did that a bit earlier in the episode. So, between episodes, I'll fix this back up. So, it will be as if nothing had occurred. So, next episode, we will be getting on to a small bit of automation. More importantly, how do you deal with the issue of long distance travel? In terms of like refilling locomotives, because there's a lot of locomotives that have massive tender space. And obviously you don't want to hand shovel that in, if you will. And how you really do that. So I'll be kind of covering that in the next episode. And from there, we'll kind of go on. So as usual, I've been DJ Zelix, aka Digital Magic from Team Lone Wolf. This has been the Immersive Railroading tutorial series. If you enjoyed this video and want to let me know, make sure to leave a like and possibly even a comment. If you want to see more gaming footage like this or get notified when the next tutorial comes out, Make sure to hit that subscribe button and that little bell icon so you get notified every single time I post up a new video. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.